Hey, Mark, it's Dennis from the Australian Rock Show. How are you?
Good, my friend. How are you going?
Excellent, excellent. Mate, really great to have you on the podcast. First off, may I say congratulations on all of the releases you've managed to get out there. The label is extremely prolific with lots of variety, which I just love. And over the past 2 or 3 years, Golden Robot must go close to having done more for the music industry here in Australia than most others. Hats off to you and all involved. A lot of hard work, I'm sure, but it's very positive.
It's very kind of you to say, mate, and it's well appreciated. I think that we've worked very hard for sure the last 5 or 6 years to put ourselves in this position, and we're in quite a commanding position. I mean, you only have to look at what we've done. I mean, we started with one record label, Golden Robot, and one band, my son's band Moon, and now we're over 400 bands and 12 record labels, working with some of the biggest and best names in the world. So, being an Australian company working internationally, that has been, it's been fantastic. It hasn't been without its, trials and tribulations, of course. There's been many ups and downs and good things and bad things and mistakes and non-mistakes and all that kind of stuff. But just be sitting here today, with, just about to go into Christmas 21 with what we've achieved. Yeah, I'm super excited and I'm super happy. So thank you.
Before this interview, mate, I was watching one of your 7-minute max video interviews, which is a great idea, by the way, where you chatted with Stuart Coupe, and you made reference to one of Stuart's books on Michael Gudinski. Makes me want to ask, as a burgeoning, label boss, how inspirational are guys like Gudinski to you?
Yeah, he was definitely very, very sort of influential. I mean, I met Michael only a couple of times. Actually, someone said to me the other day, I can't think of who it was, said, mate, you could be the next Gudinski, which I took as a massive compliment. But I think, yes, he was definitely inspiring what he did, in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, he controlled the 70s and 80s in Australia. But I've more morphed towards other guys, to be perfectly honest with you, because, you see, again, although we're Australian, I work predominantly internationally. I'm, living in LA most of the year, and most of our business is in Europe and America and Asia, not so much in Australia, although, and we'll come back to this, although that has changed over the last year with COVID, because I've been in Sydney and I've probably taken on more Australian bands than I ever have before. But I would probably say guys like David Geffen. I feel that, Michael was certainly inspirational. There's absolutely no doubt. But guys like David Geffen and, what he did in the 70s and how he revolutionised the scene in the States, and even managers like Peter Grant. I mean, if anyone knows me, they know everything starts and ends with Led Zeppelin with me. So, I love what Peter Grant did for Zeppelin, and what Geffen did for labels. And, those kind of guys on a world scale are incredible. I interviewed the other day. You're right, I've got a few podcasts and a few interviews and all different things that I do. And I did an interview the other day for a new one we've got called Conversations With, and I had a good talk to my mate Doc McGee. And what Doc was doing in the 80s again was incredible. It was just trend-setting what these guys were doing. Taking no prisoners and everything to do with their bands was number one, and they didn't give a fuck about anything else. So I really like that. I mean, yes, again, 100% you take your hats off to Michael. It was incredible what he did, but it's a real small market here. And that's pretty much why I work overseas, because it's such a small market.
I thought, just going on from that, another good place to start, Mark, is by focusing on you and your love of music. And I guess astute listeners of ours may be aware of you via your Pub Boy group, and they may have even seen the odd live gig at Sydney's Iron Duke Hotel. I know I sure did. But way before all of that, where did the journey as a music fan begin? I mean, tell me about Mark, the music fan in the 70s and 80s. Were you buying records in the 70s as a kid?
Yeah, good question. I do a lot of interviews and no one's ever asked me that, so it's a really good question. I would say my love for music started really early. I don't know how or why. I remember when my parents got divorced in 1980, and I was 13 at the time, that I put on Back in Black on vinyl. And that AC/DC album just got me through that sort of, weird time in my life. Mm. And I remember collecting, was it Bumper 77 and Sizzler 76 and all those incredible albums, with all the best ofs. Mm-hmm. So I definitely had a love for music, and then that went into cassettes, etc. It was like punk music or rock music or anything like that. It was I was always intrigued with music. I always loved music. I always was in a situation where there was always music playing or music around me. But it definitely started at a young age. 100% it started at a young age. And it's been really, I know this is going to sound cliche, but it's really been the soundtrack of my life. I've always had something there. I've always had music. It's interesting because my son, who these labels, the label started because Jagger, and let me go back a touch. It all started because of Jagger, my son, who's one of the top drummers now, pretty much in the world. He's an incredible drummer, and it started with him on Australia's Got Talent when he was about 9-10 years old. He nearly won that. When he came out of that, I decided that, I want to put a band around him. And it's quite well known how it all started with Golden Robot. But if I look at him today, he's 18, 19. We argue about music all the time because he's got his own label now, Counterclockwise Records, under our group. And he's finding some incredible left of centre artists on there. Mm. And we have such different tastes. So when the point of the story is, whenever you think you know everything about music, there's always somebody else that knows so much more about other genres, et cetera, et cetera. But I think for me, as much as I thought I knew back in those days, his knowledge of music today is quite incredible because of the internet and Spotify and Amazon and iTunes and all those things. Just the accessibility is that much wider that he can get into so many more genres. But every time I talk to him about something that I was into or I did, he just laughs in my face, thinking that it all started with him, which is your typical 18-year-old. But that's actually quite good. He's actually involved in our A&R team now, so it's quite good to have that flip side on everything. So it's quite exciting to duel with him on what's good and what's not good. He thinks I just come back to Zeppelin and the Stones and the Beatles all the time.
Which is probably fair enough. But anyway, and in the 80s, as a kid from the eastern suburbs, what were some of your most memorable gigs? And going on from that, where are you checking live bands out? Maroubra Seals or Coogee Bay Hotel maybe?
Yeah, I think, my memory is shit at the best of times. I can remember a lot of the gigs at the Iron Duke, obviously, in 97 and 99. But, yeah, I remember I used to follow two bands around, the Oils. We used to go and see as many Oils gigs as we could, like, Goat Island in the 80s and the Oils at Salinas. I remember standing outside the Bombay Rock in Surfers Paradise listening to Australian Crawl. That was awesome. So I used to love all the Aussie bands, Aussie Crawl, Midnight Oil. And then I followed Richard Clapton around for a while. I used to love having a few beers with the mates and then, belting out his songs wherever he played. So I definitely, my first band I ever saw was Devo. Funny enough, we're talking to Devo management at the moment about potentially doing something, but that was my first gig. I think it was at the Hordern, and they actually mimed it. That I remember all those years later, they were miming. But that was my first gig, live gig, and then it sort of went from there. But those Aussie bands in those days, you literally could go out 7 nights a week and see a different band. It was such a healthy scene.
Yeah, wonderful, a wonderful time period. But I know that you really, through researching this interview, you really dig the Stones. Iconic, of course, and I'm sure we could talk about some of their back catalogue at great length. But let me ask you, though, Mark, who in your opinion was the last great iconic rock and roll band? And I mean one who really took the world.
It's a good question. Let me answer it another way. I think the last iconic rock star, because there's plenty of rock and roll bands, mate, but there's just no rock stars anymore. And I mean real rock stars. And I reckon the last Aussie rock star was Hutchins, without a doubt. Michael was the last real Aussie rock star, where was equally loved by women and men. I can't think of another one other than, I mean, yes, there's some excellent front men and there's some excellent bands, of course, but a true rock star, I think when Hutchins died, that was the last true Aussie. And then you had guys like, Bowie and Chris Cornell and those kind of guys that have obviously passed away. I remember being coming out of a Tool concert. Tool's one of my favourite bands, actually, but coming out of a Tool concert in San Diego, and I was with Jagger, and we were driving back to LA, and everyone was, crying coming out of the concert. And it's like, what's going on here? And they just announced David Bowie passed away. And so on the way back, every radio station was playing Bowie. So you remember those pivotal moments. I remember where I was. In fact, actually, I was at the Iron Duke when I heard Michael died. But last band that made a difference. I mean, it's such. I do have this conversation now and then with guys like Pop again.
Iconic bands for me. Without getting too off track, it was Oasis. They were a band who wrote anthems, songs which have endured, and just my own personal opinion.
Do you think that's what an iconic band is? Songs that endure. That still sound good 40 years later.
Possibly, but I mean, music which transcends all languages. You've only got to look at some of the bands who play in big South American stadiums where they're in tears. Iron Maiden are a great example of that. But again, I mean, above those, we put the Stones and Zeppelin and the Beatles. But just off the top of my head, it was Oasis. But now, referencing the Stones there is a great segue into record collecting. I did read, mate, that you own one of the biggest and rarest vinyl collections in the Southern Hemisphere. I guess, what are some of your most interesting or rarest pieces that, as a lifelong collector myself, much of the magic of collecting records is the story behind where an album was purchased. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm looking at it at the moment, and I think I've always collected albums. I've always collected, vinyl of some sort. I had a collection going, and then I was fortunate enough to be offered a collection that came from a well-known collector that unfortunately passed away at quite a young age. But he was collecting like first pressing American Zeppelin, Stones, Eagles, Bowie, Black Flag, just was a real varied collection. I was offered that a few years ago and I bought that. So that sort of bolstered my collection. Funnily enough, just recently I've had everything catalogued onto I think it's Discogs or Vinyl Box. It's one of the two or both, because I can never remember. I remember I was looking at something the other day and I really wanted a PJ Harvey album, but I couldn't remember whether I'd owned it or not. So you start to buy the same things again.
Sure.
You start to double up. So I had everything catalogued. But, yeah, look, I spent some time in Europe going around looking for, first pressing Zeppelin. So I've got this really wide Zeppelin collection where, Led Zeppelin 4, for example, I've got, the UK first pressing, the American first pressing, the Australian first pressing, the Korean, the Japanese, the Greek, the Russian. I've got ones with the spelling mistakes on them, all that kind of stuff. So there's stories behind a lot of that stuff. But, the biggest problem I find with collecting vinyls is you just don't have enough time to play it. I've got a good system and I just don't play them enough. I buy them a lot, but I don't play it enough, unfortunately. That's my only gripe with it, that I wish I had more time to sit there, and that was always the art and the magic behind a vinyl, that you got to open the album and see the album the way the band wanted you to see it, feel it and touch it. And I love that. I love that concept. And that's why we do a lot of vinyls still. And the vinyls that we do are always special.
Before we move on, the Golden Robot logo is cool, by the way. The robot even has a turntable on there, correct?
Correct.
on his chest.
Correct.
Love that.
Correct.
Love that. Well, one of my most unique records in my collection is by Melanie, who I've long been a fan of. I have all her back catalogue, but in 71, Mark, she actually released an album which has a scratch and sniff sleeve. It's not a sticker. It's about 30% of the cover art. Melanie is sitting on a grassy field, and when you scratch the grass, it gives off a perfume smell. Back then, cover art was indeed just that, art. Is that one of the components of the label, something which you pay a lot of attention to?
100%.
Okay.
100%. I think artwork is everything. But there's two intrinsic differences now where if you're just doing something on digital, you can't go and get your artwork to be too fastidious. You can't get it to be too detailed, because really you're looking at a thumbnail on Spotify, which is then on your phone, which is even smaller. So you've got to be, you've got to be careful what you do, because you don't want to have something that you just can't tell what it is when you're looking at it on your phone. So, we try to keep things as simple as possible when they're just a digital, say it's a digital single release. You want to keep it as smooth and as intriguing as possible when it's small. But then when you go and do something on vinyl, well, the world is your oyster, isn't it? We've been doing some great stuff lately with fold outs and booklets, and I had a lot of fun when I put Horsehead back together a few years ago, and we released that box set for them. We had incredible artwork and redesigning the 12. I think it was 12 discs, but I think it was eight vinyls or 9 vinyls or something. And that was fun doing all that from the beginning. It cost a lot of money, but it was fun to put all that together. So I still think vinyl is an incredible way to sell music. Unfortunately, with COVID at the moment, the wait on vinyl, which is normally 3 months, is nearly 12 months.
Yeah.
So you've really got to be on top of what you're doing. And vinyl's gone up. Vinyl's a lot more expensive than it was because of those reasons. But it doesn't seem to stop people buying it.
As someone who has had a small indie label, I know how exciting it is to slide one of your own releases into the collection. But for you, it's extra special as, the artist, I believe, who holds that distinction you mentioned before of being first released on Golden Robot was your son, Jagger. And Moon, the Orbiter, cat number gold RR001V on green wax to boot, if I'm not mistaken. Not many dads and sons get to do that. It's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, look, Moon was interesting because, Jagger's always lived with me his whole life. I separated from his mum, divorced his mum. I've been married a few times, but I only had kids with the one lady, and that was my 2 kids, Jagger and Honey. And Jagger's always lived with me. His mother lived overseas, so we had an unusual bond anyway. And then when, it was pretty clear to everyone around that he was, a prodigy drummer. He was an incredible drummer at a very young age. And then we went through that Australia's Got Talent, and he nearly won that. When he popped out the other end, obviously being an entrepreneur, my entrepreneurial brain went off thinking, well, hang on, I don't want him to be a novelty. He needs to have a legacy. So it's quite a funny story because I can't remember exactly how it happened, but we were looking to put him in with a couple of well-known bands or people to go in and make an album, because his backing band, funnily enough, at Australia's Got Talent, which is sort of unknown. Remember the band The Preachers?
Sure.
Yeah, well, basically the guitarist and the bass player from The Preachers, who became The Preachers, was his backing band. And that's why they were so tight, and they used to rehearse. They were great. But when he popped out of that, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? I started getting advice from people, and they said, why don't you get hold of Steve Albini? And I went, well, that's not a bad idea. He's been involved in some great projects. So let's start finding Steve Albini. One thing led to another, and I ended up contacting Steve Balby, right? Ex-Noiseworks.
Sure.
So I'm speaking to Balby, thinking I'm speaking to Albini. Right?
That's funny.
So anyway, Balby and I got on well, and he loved Jagger, and they ended up going into the studio with another cat called Mark Ward, and Mark was in, Pearls and Swine. He's a complete maniac, but lovely guy. And they went into the studio just to see what they'd come out with. And they did a few sessions, and they came out with this awesome rock album. And they called it The Orbiter. They called the band Moon. And we were sitting there with this great piece of work. And I still think it's a fantastic album. There's a song on it called Ronnie Biggs. Jagger was 10 and absolutely slays it. Still to this day, it's one of the best rock songs I've heard. And I'm not just saying that because it's his song, but it really is a great song. And there was a lot of synergy between Mark, Steve, and Jagger. And long story short, that's how it all started, because when we were sitting there, I'd given them as a gift a little porcelain golden robot to thank them for being in the studio and looking after Jagger, etc. So when we decided to do it ourselves, because I'd shopped it around and nobody was interested, that little fella was sitting there. So I thought, let's call it Golden Robot Records. So, having that sort of that link back to Jagger, if it wasn't for that, this probably wouldn't have started, is quite unique. To answer your question. It's very unique to say, well, the business that's thriving and has got to the size that it is today all started really because of my son and because of trying to create something for him that was a little bit different. And, all these years later, he's working for us now. So it's pretty cool. He's actually just written an incredible solo album that's being produced at the moment. So I think 2022, you'll see Jagger go out on his own, do his own solo stuff, which is going to be pretty powerful and pretty exciting to be involved with.
For listeners who may not be aware, starting out as a single label a few years ago, Golden Robot Global Entertainment has expanded quickly to meet demand and now has 12 worldwide labels spanning a multitude of genres and styles. I've mentioned before that one thing I love about the label is the diversity. Does having different labels mean it's more effective in managing and supporting a diverse roster of acts? For example, putting a ska or a punk band on a rock label?
Yeah, it's something I think about all the time because, when you've got a business on a global scale, or even if you've got a business in Bondi Beach or in Newcastle, you want to be known. I have, grand ambitions to be known all over the world. Some people don't think like that, but that's fine. Each to their own, but you want to be known. So to me, it's all about marketing. It's all about the logo. It's all about your font. It's all about your mission statement, your ethos, et cetera, et cetera. So I sit there sometimes and I think, should I have just kept it all under Golden Robot Records? 400 bands, Golden Robot Records. Doesn't matter whether it's a country band, a ska band, a punk band, a rock band, should it have all been? And then I come back to what I originally thought of, and that's no, it's got to be like this because there's diversity on the roster anyway with Golden Robot. If I had $1 for every time someone in America said, oh my God, Golden Robot's exactly like Interscope was in the early days where Jimmy Iovine, he had No Doubt and Enrique Suave and Nine Inch Nails, for example. And I've got, Filter, LA Guns, Riley's LA Guns, Vanilla Fudge, Jefferson Starship, next to up-and-coming UK bands, next to David Mini Asian, who's a prog rock guy, next to, all these different sort of bands, next to Nick Barker, for example. And you think, Nick Barker and LA Guns on the same label, that sounds weird, but it actually works really, really well. So we've got that diversity on the Golden Robot main roster, but then when you get a whole lot of punk bands, it makes sense. It's all under Riot Records or Crusader Records, which is really becoming in Europe a top, or has become in Europe a top metal label. And so it makes sense. Sometimes we cross-promote. But, I've been wanting to get into the pop market, which we've just done recently, and I can talk about that in a second. But pop wouldn't have worked, I don't think, under Golden Robot. I think it needed its own clear label, and that's what we've done recently.
Is there a country music label under the
Yes.
Golden Robot? Okay.
Yeah, Social Family Records, run by
big
Nadia
market
Drake,
here in Australia, isn't it? And, of course,
huge.
North America.
Well, Social Family is the number one country label in Australia next to ABC Music.
Wow.
She just got 3 Golden Guitar Award nominations, including Female Artist of the Year for Hayley Jensen last week.
Great.
So it's been an incredible breeding ground for country artists in Australia and overseas. We've had, for example, Cormac Neeson is on it, who's the lead singer of The Answer. Remember the Irish band The Answer? They're also signed to Golden Robot. They go into the studio early next year to do a new album, first album in about 7 years for Golden Robot, which will be fantastic. So he in his off time singing in a rock band, he does country soul, Americana stuff. So that goes out through Social Family. So Social Family's been around for a while. That was one of the first labels I bought out in 2015 when I started.
Now, since the label's formation, there has been a host of great Australian talent on the roster: Super Jesus, Palace of the King, Flickertail, The Vendettas, My Sex, Horsehead, Jimmy Barnes, The Lazies, The Tats, Steve Kilby, to name but a few. Glenn Shorrock, which was interesting, Baby Animals.
Yep.
Lots of amazing talent in that gathering, Mark, and I think early on some of those signings helped to bolster Golden Robot. I just mentioned Rose Tattoo. Where and when did your love of the Tats begin?
Look, I mean, who doesn't love Rose Tattoo? I mean, Rose Tattoo are a great band. I in the very early days, very, very early days when I wanted to sort of conquer the Australian scene, I reached out and, I signed Sarah McLeod to a solo album, and I got the Super Jesus for an EP. Actually, I think the Super Jesus at that point was signed with the Baby Animals already to Social Family Records, because it was run sort of as a bit of a rock label.
Okay.
And then it morphed into a country label and stayed that way. So I think I inherited that. But it was through those contacts. I can't remember how it happened, but I just ended up speaking to Angry and sat down with him. And you got to remember, in those days, Angry had had enough. So this was about 2015. He was done. DeMarco was in jail, and everything else was where it was. And I said to him, "Man, let's do something. Let's get a legacy. Let's wrap this up," because he was on his way up the coast, I think, and was selling everything off, and he'd had enough, and he was going to retire. So, I could very much say that if it wasn't for what we did, he probably would have retired. So we went out and we did a deal, and he gave me a hard drive, and on that hard drive there was some super cool stuff. There was the Tats live in Brunswick in, I think, like 85. There was Blood Brothers. There was like a few other things. So we went along and we released live in Brunswick. We released remastered Blood Brothers, which we've just done an incredible blood red vinyl on, actually, only a couple of months ago. And then I got the rights to Beats of a Single Drum through Mushroom, and which was released, which we're going to do vinyl again next year. And I think there's 5. I think we did 5 Rose Tattoo albums. But, I mean, Rose Tattoo, like a lot of the bands these days, you look at My Sex. My Sex, I think, has got... I mean, we did an album with My Sex when there was, I think, 3 or 4 of the original guys in there. Don unfortunately passed away, I think it was last year. And he was one of the last remaining members on bass. It's a great loss to the Australian music scene. But, I think My Sex today is, I don't even know if there's any, I think maybe Murray's on keys still. But, a lot of these bands that keep going, but they don't have really the original members. I mean, I think the Tats now, Angry is the only original member, because I know Die's not in the band anymore. And Jackie Barnes was on drums for a while. Actually, we just did a deal with Jackie Barnes. He's got an incredible band called Genghis Nash that's got a single coming out in the next week, I think it is. Jimmy Barnes' son, Jackie. He's got an incredible band. So I just signed him. But, yeah, I think in those early days it was just so incredible to be involved with those guys, because a lot of those guys, I remember the Choir Boys and Rose Tattoo and those other bands that we were dealing with, they hadn't, even I remember Nick Barker calling Nick, and no one had really paid that much attention to it. So they were just happy someone was interested in wanting to do something. And I think Nick Barker is one of the best songwriters in Australia, and we've just released his whole back catalogue. We've got the whole back catalogue there. We're involved in quite a few Aussie back catalogues. There's a guy called Stuart Cunningham that is just releasing an album at the moment with us, with his band Leadfinger. But
I've got a couple of questions about Leadfinger and the Asteroids right up next. So it's
Yeah, well, Johnny Casino, all these guys. So there's a lot that we do behind the scenes
Yeah.
that we don't talk about to keep these back catalogues going. But look, to have an to answer your question, to have an association with the Tats in the early days and Super Jesus and all those bands, yeah, of course, that was awesome.
Yeah.
It all helped. It all helped. We were putting money into it. Yeah, sure, we were making mistakes, but we were fixing those and we were learning. It was awesome. Awesome time.
Well, Asteroid B612 were a band we championed in the 1990s. That forced into a corner album from 94 and 96 is Not Meant for This World were both incredible records. I believe your friendship with Johnny Casino began when the Asteroids would play at the Iron Duke, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
Okay. So as a side note, I think it's very cool that all these years later you've got both Johnny and Stu Leadfinger Cunningham on the label. And may I add, bands like the Asteroids got very little industry support back in the day, and it is wonderful that Golden Robot have recently made available most of the back catalogue digitally, and I know that some of our long-time followers are going to want to go and grab some of that. Just going on from that, and I'm not sure if you saw the Asteroids when Grant MacGyver was on vocals around 94, 95. Serious firepower in that band, and in my opinion, at that time period, were one of the top 2 or 3 live bands in the country at that time. Just thought I'd put that out there before we move on.
I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. And I have to say this to you, to be involved with Johnny's whole back catalogue, Stuart's whole back catalogue, bands like Mark of Cain when we did Battle Sick, Kilby, the My Sex stuff, the Balby stuff originally. We were all honoured to be part of this stuff. It's incredible music. Still, I released a Nick Barker song only last week, and he's got a new album out next year. It's just incredible to be part of it. And you got to remember, I'm a music fan first and foremost. Yes, and I'm an entrepreneur, but I feel very privileged to be in this position, to be dealing with the bands and the artists and the management, etc., that I'm dealing with. And I was on the Zoom to the UK last night with the team that Nick Cave, Radiohead, PJ Harvey. I mean, these are serious players in the business that we're dealing with. And I feel very honoured to be in that position, and not a day goes by that I don't understand that and I don't appreciate that. So when I see Golden Robot's logo on the back of Battlesick or the back of an Asteroid B612 album, it still means something, 100%. And the day it doesn't mean anything to me, it's probably the day I should give it up.
Well, as I said, I don't know how many people will thank you, but as a fan of that band, and I saw him a lot in Sydney back in the day, thank you for making all that stuff available for other people to discover, because it's just wonderful rock and roll. But we in fact kicked this show off with something recent from Leadfinger, the track The Fall of Rome, second single taken from their soon-to-be-released new album. Have long been a fan of those guys. They write catchy, melodic rock tunage with tons of hooks. And I guess your association with Stu began back at the Iron Duke as well?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Iron Duke was really interesting. That 97 to 99, when the Annandale closed down, then all those venues, the Sando was going hard, the Hopetown. It was just a really interesting time for us, and we did a lot of interesting things. And I remember, we brought the Deftones out, the Helicopters out, Magic Dirt played there, Silverchair played there, Eskimo Joe started there. It was a real influential time, and we were right in the right place at the right time. So, yeah, I still get people talking to me about the Iron Duke even today. It's really cool. It was almost like the CBGBs for a small point, in time in Australia. It was a good thing to be involved with. Didn't make any money from it, but it was a cool thing to be involved with.
Now, there's a whole slew of great international bands on the label as well. Steve Riley's LA Guns, Dead Daisies, Gilby Clarke, Hardcore Superstar, Dizzy Reed, and a couple of wonderful surprises for me when I learned about them. Vanilla Fudge, Jefferson Starship, John Sykes, Japanese metal outfit Anthem, Michael DeBar from Silverhead, and the Hollywood Stars. Were you a fan of someone like Anthem or Silverhead? How did those bands come to be on Golden Robot?
Well, Michael DeBar's I've known for a while. We were involved with another label for a while that we're not involved with anymore. And I met Michael through that label. And him and I, funnily enough, were planning a really cool songbook idea next year where we're going to be doing covers of 70s, 80s, 90s, some real glam stuff, and he's going to sing it. And guys like, Clem Burke are going to be on drums, Steve Stevens on guitar. They're all friends. And Michael's an enigma. He's unbelievable. He's literally been there and done that on radio, on TV, on film and music. He fucking played at Live Aid. I mean, it doesn't get any bigger than that with the Power Station, which was basically half of Duran Duran. So what a great guy. Look, nobody gets on the label unless we like what's going on, whether it's hardcore, Superstar, Crash Diet, all those Swedish rock bands that are coming through at the moment on Crusader. There's some fantastic. What happens is this. It's the management that we get on well with. Management has trouble with labels. They come to us, we do a good job, and we end up getting 3 of their bands. That's what happens. Okay. And, we've got Crash Diet, same manager, Hardcore Superstar, same manager has Ammo Track. So we take Ammo Track, who's just about to be announced and signed and everything, so it's fine. But these are all bands that are pulling really well in Europe and doing really well and selling lots of vinyl and know what they're doing. And so it's quite exciting to be involved in that. And we just opened a UK office to deal with the flow of all the bands from Europe and the UK. So, mate, I'm flying that Aussie flag absolutely everywhere. And I've got to say, being an Australian working in Europe and America in this business, if you had $1 for every time someone said, this is really refreshing to hear and to see, and the fact that I'm not jaded and burnt out in this industry, it's fantastic. There's a lot of people that you deal with in Australia, and there's some fantastic people in Australia, but there's a lot of people in Australia that are burnt out and pissed off and just not making the right decisions for people or their bands. Yes, you get that in America as well, and you get that in Europe. But if you can keep your attitude right and you can keep your focus and stay humble and stay on the right path. And as I say to people all the time, if we fuck something up, we'll apologise and fix it. If we do something well, we'll celebrate it with you. And that motto's worked for us.
Yeah, as I said at the very start of the interview, it's invigorating to see so many releases coming out and, great diversity. But you also licensed and released a couple of Johnny Thunders tracks. Were you a fan of Thunders and indeed the New York Dolls?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. I mean, when I was growing up, that's what I, listened to in those. That's what I argue with Jagger about. He doesn't reckon I ever listened to punk, but, I remember my cassettes with Isotope Soap and the Dead Kennedys and New York Dolls and the Ramones and all that kind of stuff on it. It was legendary. It's still iconic to today because you can listen to it and it makes sense.
Mark, as a long-time fan of all-girl rock and roll outfits and indeed female musicians, I was excited to learn about the She Who Rocks label, the female-led and female-run music label, which kicked off earlier this year. What's in the works for She Who Rocks?
Yeah, She Who Rocks is really cool. She Who Rocks is this when everything was going on in the industry, which, everyone watches what happened at Sony and around the world. I just felt that there needed to be a platform, just a better set up label for female musicians that wanted to deal with female executives. My whole team is basically female anyway. It always has been. And it was just a nice, safe place to release some music and do it. And we've got some big plans next year. We've got some plans for some concerts. I'm really excited. I'm really excited about it. I think that if you break down every label has got something different to offer. And it's something different. That's why it exists. But I think, over the next 2 years, we've got some really special plans for She Who Rocks with some we're about to announce a couple more bands we're about to sign as well.
Great. Now, besides rock and roll, one of my other great loves is motorcycle racing, and I was pleasantly surprised to discover via Golden Robot's sports and entertainment division that there is a smart-looking Ducati number 9 ridden by a talented young guy named Peroz Huckstep.
Correct.
What can you tell me about Golden Robot racing?
Well, look, this is something I'm really, really passionate about and excited about at the moment, and I just don't know. Well, I know nobody else is doing this, so we're really leading the pack. It was like, having no restraints and being able to make decisions and pivot as a company has really led the charge. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago now, when the vaccinations were low, we thought, fuck this, let's get the music industry back together. Let's do this, let's do that. And we came out with an initiative called Rock the Vax. And we said to everyone, go and get vaccinated between May, I think it was, I can't remember the dates, it was like May 15 and June 15 or something like that. And if you show us your certificate, you tick whatever that you've got it, we'll send you a free album. Now that cost us a fortune, but I was happy to do it because it was our part in helping and supporting the community. I don't think it made someone who wasn't going to get vaccinated but wasn't going to get vaxxed go and get it just to get a free album.
Well, you never know.
But you never know, but it certainly hurried people up. So doing things like that made me think, I'm always thinking out of the square. Anyway, tomorrow, I don't know when you're going to go live with this, but December 3rd, we are dropping this incredible album that you'll be the first person to talk about called Rock for Myanmar. And that is an initiative where it's not a political statement. It's not anything to do with that. It's just an awareness campaign for bringing attention to what's going on in Myanmar. And that album, you look for it from tomorrow on Spotify, iTunes, is so incredible. LA Guns are on it. Hot Shell Ray's on it. There's some incredible Vanilla Fudge. There's some incredible bands that have put their music to it to support the awareness of what's going on in Myanmar. So after doing those couple of Rock the Vax and Rock Myanmar, I thought, you know what? I want to take this further and I want to be able to spread the word of what Golden Robot's doing, because really at the end of the day, the bigger Golden Robot becomes as a company, Golden Robot Global Entertainment, the better it is for the artist. Because if I've got Flickertail that we just released a single for after so many years, want to play at a festival, I can call up, it's Mark Alexander from Golden Robot, and they're going to listen to you. The more power you can sort of get in this industry, people will potentially listen to you, which is good for the bands. I don't give a shit about it for me, but it's good for the bands. And that I'm always there for the bands. It's a big rock and roll family. So whatever I can do more for our bands and our artists, I'll do. So by creating SED, the Sports and Entertainment Division, it was a natural step for us. So what I liked to do, and look, I've been doing this since the Pub Boy days. I was sponsoring Peter Brock's Ute series, where I had Pub Boy all over the Utes as they rolled around Bathurst, and I've got bits of those cars in a warehouse still sitting there. But I decided to sponsor Paros, and it's actually a Yamaha that he's got. It's a Yamaha.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, he does drive a Ducati, so that's that. He does ride a Ducati, and I love my bikes and cars, so that was natural for me. So we sponsored him. He wrapped his Yamaha in orange and put Golden Robot all over it and Black Little Robots all over it. So it's been fabulous. So that's been everyone. And the deal is he'll go and race. We'll put our music over the race videos. It's good for the artists. It gives them another way to market. It gives them another way to push. And then I thought, this is fantastic because people are watching this in Australia, but hang on, I want to take this like we do with everything else to the world stage. So you click and you go, well, what's the fastest growing sport in the world? UFC. And I love UFC. We train boxing every day anyway. So we put a division together, and one of the guys that works for me, Johnny, he and I put together a game plan, and I went out after UFC fighters, and I can tell you that we've signed 4 up-and-coming UFC fighters that all in their own right could be champions.
Wow.
2 are Aussies, and the other 2 are American, 2 female and 2 male, and we're just about to sign another 2. So that division will have 6 UFC fighters. So what they do is, and this will blow you away, and I'm so excited about this. So here you have a band from Australia or America or Israel or South America, it doesn't matter. Here's a band that wants to go and reach beyond their Instagram followers, beyond their live circuit, beyond what we can do with their music. Here I can take their music, I can put it over a training video for a UFC fighter who's got 1.1 million followers. And all of a sudden, their crew, their followers, listens to the song and goes, oh, I like that. And at the end of the video, like the 1 minute training video or whatever they are doing that day, it says, song by Flickertail, Heroes,
Wow.
or whoever the band is.
That's smart.
And so all of a sudden, they've got this large influx because they've got another audience listening to the music. And then on the flip side, the UFC fighters are then getting that rock and roll world involved in what they're doing. And there's one thing that I've been very happy about with Golden Robot is, as it's a large family, you've got a lot of bands promoting each other. And I've never seen that in any other labels, where you've got bands joining the roster, being congratulated by other bands, and then they're promoting each other's. So if you've got Filter, Richard Patrick, with a couple of million followers, and he puts out, I love this band, one of my label mates, I love this song, or LA Guns does it to their 600,000 Spotify followers and 400,000 or 500,000 Facebook followers, etc. You've got this incredible extra fan base that we're tapping into across all our music. So the key to that is, and the key to the UFC fighters, they're obviously going to be wearing our Golden Robot T-shirts, and we're doing Golden Robot gloves and all those kind of awesome things. But the clinker to me is, in the deal that we've done with the fighters, is that we can work with management and we can put one of our songs as their walkout song on any event, even a pay-per-view event that they're fighting on. So can you imagine releasing a new Riley's LA Gun single, and the first time it's ever been heard, it's at that pay-per-view event as the fighter's walking out?
Yeah.
I mean, that stuff's just not being done. So I'm really thinking outside the square to promote our band's music across the world. And I'm so excited. In January, I'll be back in LA and going to the fight where a couple of our fighters will be fighting on that bill. I'm not saying who they are at the moment because we're going to announce it over the next few weeks on socials. But it's just a really exciting part of the business that to me makes perfect sense, but nobody else is doing it.
That all sounds positive. How hard is it to get music into film?
It's hard. We work with a few sync places. We got Vanilla Fudge's Once Upon, Quentin Tarantino's movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yep.
Well, Vanilla Fudge got one of their songs into the most pivotal scene when Brad Pitt gets hit in the head with a can and goes nuts. We got that into there. We've got various things, over time. We've had various things into movies, and that's one of the ideas of what Michael DeBars and I are going to do, these 70s, 80s, 90s cover songs, and put all that up for sync, because that makes perfect sense to do that. It's a good market out there for sync. Bands can make great money from sync.
And as a side note, you just mentioned Michael DeBar again. Anyone listening who hasn't heard those first couple of Silverhead albums need to go and do that after we finish chatting, mate. It's been a blast chatting with you. A lot of your stuff gets sent regularly, and it's great to have you on the phone and to get some of the backstory. We should start to wind things up and get out of here. GoldenRobotRecords.com, that's the place which listeners need to visit. I guess you've just explained some of the future plans, but is there anyone who you'd like to sign, and what's on the card for the next 12 months? Yeah, good question. I am working on some, I think, the next couple of steps are varied. Yep. There's some real A-listers that are coming on. There's some big stuff that we're working on as far as some exciting developments. I'm talking A-list bands. I wish I could tell you now, but I can't. But there's there's two big ones that I'm working on at the moment that I reckon will happen, and we're in that position to do that now. But probably the most exciting is Yama Records, and Yama Records is our new label, which has put us into the pop market. And I've started that with a really well-known American band that has been TikTok darlings for 10 years. They're called Hot Shell Ray, and their Tonight songs at like 300 million. They've got nearly 4 million monthly listeners on Spotify, and they are the nicest guys, and they were being chased by the majors. And I said to them, look, let's do a label together. So not only can you put your music out on that, we just released a new single a week ago or 2 weeks ago called Heart and Mind. Not only can they put their own music out through Yama Records, which they loved,
and have an owning stake in it, but they can now become A&R for their own label. So other like-minded pop bands, they can A&R and potentially produce and put out through Yama Records. So it's a real different way to do things involving the higher profile bands. That I'm really excited about. And I love working with them. I'm just not going to work with people anymore that are, don't have a finger on the pulse and think it's 1987, because it just turns into dramas. This is hard enough, this industry, without, working with people that just don't have a proper handle on their expectations. And guys like that have great expectations and they understand the industry. So it's a pleasure to work with them. So I'm really excited about Yama Records and what we can achieve. And that single came out about 10 days ago, and it's doing really, really well. So I'm excited.
It again, sounds really, really positive, which is great to hear. Every guest on our show gets to choose a song by an Australian band, something which is significant to you. What would you like to choose and why?
Wow. Only one. I reckon that I'm looking to do a deal at the moment with Marty Wilson Piper and doing some of his back catalogue. So I reckon let's do a church song. Let's do two. Let's do a church song. Let's do Under the Milky Way by the Church. And actually, let's do three. You pick what you want. Let's do Under the Milky Way by the Church. Let's do Branded by Rose Tattoo, because every time I've got a tattoo ever, and I've got 2 sleeves and my chest and back, etc., are all tatted up. Every single time I've always played Branded by the Tats, and I've just had some work done, so that reminds me of the Tats. And thirdly, let's play something off Back in Black. In fact, why don't you play Back in Black? Because that was the album really when I was 13 that cemented it in for me for rock and roll.
3 fine choices, and I'm actually going to close out with my choice at the very end, which is going to be an Astro B612 number. So again, great to air some of those great songs to listeners who may not be aware of that material. Thank you again, Mark. Please keep in touch, and let's talk again soon.
Okay, buddy.
Thank you, Mark. Bye-bye.
Thank you.